Hi, everyone. You made it. It's almost the end of the day. Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, early evening. Get excited. We have a really, really cool session on deploying analytics best practices with Open Society Foundation. And I'd like to introduce our two esteemed speakers. I have János Csongor. János is the head of legal systems for Open Society Foundations. In his role, he both oversees the information systems owned by the legal department and advises the general counsel on internal policies and processes. János has worked in legal operations at OSF in various roles for the last 14 years. Before that, he worked for the US DoD as a consultant in Hungary in the area of contract lifecycle management. He has 4 children, 1 dog, and a varying number of cats. It was 2 when he left home last week, but the number may have changed when he returns home. He has to regularly fend off accusations of being a lawyer.
Not a lawyer.
Rose Howard is also with us today. Rose is responsible for managing the global application portfolio at the Open Society Foundations. These applications include, but are not limited to, managing and driving OSF towards leveraging Salesforce as a core strategic platform, and the use of Einstein analytics in order to drive transformation or transparency and informed decision-making to the organization. In a role, Rose works with her business partners to drive solutions, leveraging technology as an enabler that aligns with the IT and organizational structure at OSF. Rose joined OSF in 2012 as a consultant and was hired in 2013 as an employee. Since joining OSF, she has been leading organizational transformation efforts. In less than 5 years, she's led the shift of the organization from paper and pencil to the current age of digital innovation, leveraging Salesforce, Einstein Analytics, and of course, Apttus. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's always fun to be the last session before drinks because you know people aren't going to ask you too many questions at the end. In terms of what we're doing at the Open Society Foundations, I thought where we would start is how we approach doing any implementation. That is why I have my colleague János share with me today. Whenever OSF does an implementation, the first thing that we do is find a business partner that wants to lead the opportunity and really wants to work really, really hard with us. And so I'm going to turn it over to János for just a little bit. He's going to tell you a little bit about our journey and how we got to analytics, dashboards, and we'll even get back to where we're going from here.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you for having us. This is our second Accelerate. We are happy to be back, and our first time presenting. So in order to tell you our journey with dashboards and Salesforce with Apttus, I want to tell you just a little bit about who we are. We are called the Open Society Foundations. We are a global family of foundations. We have some, that's not a dashboard that you see there, but there is some analytics, the organization in numbers. And what's important and relevant for our session here today is that even though, if you can believe the newspapers, we are second largest by assets managed globally. I read it 2 days ago. Not that we keep count. Still, we are unlike any other large global foundations that we are aware of because we are very complex when it comes to how the organization is structured and being managed. And that complexity, of course, impacts all aspects of our lives, including contract lifecycle management. So, where is that complexity coming from? As you saw on the previous slide, we have 40 offices. We have a lot more legal entities than offices. Most large foundations are the other way around. One big entity and multiple offices throughout the world. Now, to make it even more complex, the 40 entities and the 40 offices and the 40 plus entities most of them are legally independent of each other, whereas with other large foundations, you have one legal entity and it has branch offices in various jurisdictions. So for us, we have to, for all of the entities and offices, we have to comply with the local jurisdictions, but for several transactions, it's not only one entity that's involved. So in that case, we have to take into account all the jurisdictions of all the entities involved in a given transaction. One aspect of that is that when we enter into various service contracts that benefit multiple of our entities, more often than not, we need to have multiple entities from our end enter into that contract, not just one representing everybody else. And of course, we want to track that in our CLM system. And even though all of these entities are legally independent, we still want to be able to see one big global picture when it comes to dashboards and analytics and reporting and management. So to elaborate a little bit on our context and background where we're coming from, we did have a contract management system before we signed with Apttus. As a matter of fact, we had two. And that's one of the situations where more is actually less, because the two systems were on the two continents, in the US and in Europe. They came from the original, a single piece of original source code, but over 6-7 years, they followed different development paths so much that if somebody built something for one of the systems, it could not be implemented for the other one. It had to be built again. They were both SQL-based, ran on an in-house server, developed by Rosie's team. And they got the job done. They were not horrible or anything, but we constantly ran into problems when the European and the US parts of the organization tried to work together. And we especially ran into trouble when management asked us for a global report, because from SQL, you can get reports, not as nice as from Salesforce, but you can. And the way that looked like is I had to speak to someone on Rosie's team, a developer, a really smart guy, was doing all kinds of important developing, told him I need a report. He had to stop the developing, pull the report, export it into Excel, make it pretty because he's proud of his work, give it to me. I realized I forgot something. I told him to adjust it. He gave it to me. We presented it to management. Management said, add 2 more things. We did that. And so we could do this separately for Europe, and we could do this separately for the US. But to put those 2 reports together into one global report, that was 1 week's work, roughly, for someone, because the fields were different. Even if the fields were called the same, they had still different content and all those things like that. People were constantly complaining they don't know where their contract is. And so I remember saying to one of them, what do you mean you don't know where your contract is? It has a status field in the system. It says LABPCN. You've been here 2 years. You don't know what that means? He said, no. I said, okay, we have a problem. We should do something about that. And we only learned this actually when we were doing discovery with Apttus. We had 30 contract types total that we were working on in the legal department, and only 10 of them went in our legacy system. Of course, they were the 10 most common. They were our bread and butter. When it comes to numbers, they were a really high percentage of the total contract volume. I remember during discovery, they asked us, so how many contracts do you have off system? And that reminded me when my son's doctor asked me, so what does your son do when you're not there and he's alone? And I said, I'm not there. I don't know. And it's the same with the off-system contracts. Of course, we could have used some kind of method like to keep track of them, but we didn't. And so from there, we signed with Apttus. implemented a CLM solution. That was a fast forward of 2 years. And now we're in an entirely different place that I don't think we even knew existed 2 years ago, 3 years ago when we started all this. Again, we have some numbers on the slide. That's from Rose because we thought you guys like numbers since you're into analytics. And I want to turn it over to Rose here a little bit to talk about the implementation and data migration.
So I asked Janos the question that I've asked him like 3 times before, literally as we're standing outside the door, that said, if we had to do this again, you'd still pick Apttus, right? And he said, yes. Why do you keep asking me that? And so when you take a look at this slide, this is one of the reasons that I keep asking him that question. Our legal team has the significant advantage of having been the implementation that happened behind our grant system replacement and our finance system replacement. And so we learned when we did those things where our partners and vendors did well and where they really didn't do well. And that was generally around integration and data migration. And so we also learned that when we've historically migrated like our grant system, which was just like contracts, we had these 2 systems, and in many cases, we actually had grantees or contractors in both systems, and when we migrated, we created a whole host of duplicate data, which was terrible. And so I give you this background in terms of as we were thinking about how do we get to reporting and analytics and dashboards, in this particular instance, we started with how do we set up the data the right way this time. And so we had a whole project that was about how do we put the data together from both contract systems. And then because our grant system is also in Salesforce, we then had to pile that on top of existing data that was already there. And so aside from just getting 30 contract types into the system, we had a huge data migration that went along with it. And so from our perspective, we didn't want to have 3 versions of Apttus in the system when we went live. And so that was really, really big for us. We also had to use some offline tools to bring all the historical attachments in. And so we chose to bring 3 years worth of data. Yes?
5.
5?
Yes.
I said 3. And so we've got more data now because we've been live for just over a year. And I would say that from my perspective, we made a significant decision, put a lot of other projects on hold, and pulled my technical team and a lot of Janos's time and his team's time into taking a look at all this data and trying to figure out how to get it in a place where when we turned Apttus on, it would look like some version of history even existed back then too.
And so now we have all these wonderful things. Before we implemented CLM, we had approvals in our old system. It was extremely inconsistent on who could approve what. We have different workflows in Europe and in the US. And now we still have different workflows, but the workflows are not varying based on the location. The workflows are different based on how we define the requirements. Certain things need to be approved by certain people, other things need to be approved by others, certain things can to be fast-tracked, and it's really, really great. Of course, it didn't come for free. It cost time, tears, blood, money. In our case, it came out of Rose's budget, so it wasn't like real money, but you may not be that lucky. So this is where we are, and in order to talk about analytics, we have to talk about a little bit on where we are going. As I said, we have 30 agreement types now, thanks to Apttus, in the system. You will see a dashboard really, really soon, I promise. And on the dashboard, you will see that we are not using some of those agreement types at all, which to me is really interesting because we did not come up with the 30 based on, we might do one of these one day. We actually took stock of what are the things we are doing. And so the fact that they are not in the system can mean at least 2 things. One is that we are doing them really, really rarely, or there's been a lull for some reason. And the other reason is some nasty person is processing those offline, and I have to go and find them and talk to them a little bit. And of course, when you talk about analytics, I keep hearing this magic word KPI when that is when analytics is the subject. And so for us, it's really hard to find, specifically within legal, not necessarily for the Open Society Foundations, it's hard to find a performance indicator because, of course, time is of the essence for us as well, for our client satisfaction and for our supporting our grantees. But it's, of course, more important to do high-quality work, and it's very hard to have metrics for high-quality legal work. But at the same time, time-based metrics can still help, because if someone is consistently processing contracts really quickly, in my experience, that could usually mean that they have a lighter workload than others, so we can give more to that person. Or they are not doing their job right. They are skipping something or not doing something that everybody is doing, and that's why they are being faster. Of course, it's possible that they are really, really good at their job and they need to teach everybody else how they are doing what they are doing so that everybody can be as fast as they are, but that's fairly rare. And in order to track those things, we had Apttus set up what are called cycle time reports, where you can report on each contract how long it took between various statuses and status categories to get from one place to another. It's very useful in retrospect. What it doesn't do is it doesn't alert you if something is idle somewhere and stuck in the process. So you have to use different fields and different report methodologies for that. And there was a massive training effort where we implemented the Apttus CLM solution separately for legal, separately for finance, separately for what we call the business, even though we are a nonprofit. We also brought in reporting and dashboard and analytics specialists to help us specifically with reporting training. But I think we are not anywhere near 100% on leveraging what the system can give us in the field of analytics or otherwise. So we are definitely looking to both get more training for the legal team and get more training for everybody else to leverage what we have and what we're paying for. And there is some AI thing I keep hearing about. I know what the term means. I read sci-fi and stuff, but I just can't put it in my mind together how that relates to Salesforce. And so Rose agreed to help out with this part. So take it away.
Sure. So Janos is going to show you one of his dashboards in just a few minutes. But essentially where the Open Society Foundations is going is in a little bit of a two-phased approach, which is we're working on our analytics and dashboards within Salesforce right now to give them visibility that they've never had before. And so, for example, part of what we need to do when we introduce this level of analytics and dashboards is we really have to bring up the knowledge of what data is to our organization. To Janos's point, he doesn't know if somebody who's fast is working really quickly, is not reading their contracts. We don't know what it is. And so we're trying to do and come up with an approach to kind of increase the data level of education to say, this dashboard isn't necessarily answer. This dashboard is a jumping off point to say, what do we need to look at? And so is slow good, is fast good? I can remember showing the first dashboard to our previous president, and I remember walking out the door and he turned to me and he said, I heard you, Rose. Slow doesn't mean bad. I got it. And so in terms of mobile, with Salesforce, mobile is very much available, but we are primarily, most of our work for contracts in particular is done in the office. I would say that signature and final reviews are sometimes often done on the road, but a majority of our staff are working inside the office. And so one of our future phases is to look at what are some of our mobile needs so that we can take our dashboards from where they are now to potentially use them a little bit more mobile. And to me, iPad is somewhat mobile, but I'm thinking more like smaller phone type of thing. Another piece of work that we're doing is the little Einstein words got pulled off of our presentation because that's the analytics tool that we use. And so we are also looking at pulling in our contracts data into our current Einstein solution. And so we are really looking at what data they have and how we can help, say, for some of the complexities of a dashboard that Salesforce might not give you, what can we do in Einstein? We already have the data being pulled from our grants and travel and our ticketing systems. And we are currently working on pulling in our budget to actual data. And so we're looking forward to being able to pull all of that together. And for example, we can predict currently in Einstein how long it will take which grants officer to process a grant based on the country that it came from, the grants officer that's working on it, the program that's running it. And so we expect to be able to try to do something similar as we start to focus a little bit more on our contracts.
Now that I know what it is, I'm not sure I want it. Anyway, so I wanted to tell you about a couple of dashboards. This is the only one I actually can show you, because the other ones wouldn't be that meaningful or visual. So this dashboard, in a slightly different form, was built for us by Apttus when we rolled out. And the purpose we were using it for is to track adoption. And all it really does is tracks, the first two columns track agreements created, and the third column tracks payments created, because we are also creating our contract payments in Apttus CLM. And even though the original intent was solely for tracking adoption, we have found so many other uses for it that to this day, every Monday morning, this is the first email that the general counsel gets, along with a couple of other people. And to elaborate, we're running short on time, but to elaborate a little bit, for example, top left corner, agreements created since go live. Should the general counsel ask me why we paid so much overtime last August, not that she would ever ask me that, there are other people who deal with that, but if she would, I could point to that little bump, 185.
Big bump.
And I could say, somebody submitted 5% of our annual workload in 1 week. So those two things could be related. If you look at the bottom row in the middle, those are the agreement types. You don't even, I can tell you, those are not even 30 columns, and some of them are really, really flat. So this is the adoption, possible adoption problem I was talking about. The 10 we had in the old system, we have plenty of those, as you can see. Not surprisingly, those are the high values, but the other ones are really flat. We have to find out why. The one in the bottom left corner, I was telling you about legal entities. We have 10 plus entities right now in CLM. And so this is showing contracts by entity. And the interesting part I want to share about this is one day the general counsel said that, so there is one entity I'm really interested in, but it's really small on this chart. So I can find it, I can find the value, but it takes me a long time. So do something about that. And what we did, it cannot be seen here because it would make the chart even smaller. We simply added another dashboard component. And what that dashboard component does, it shows the entities that have 100 or less contracts. And so on that dashboard component, that interesting entity is really easy to find and really clear to see. So we want to talk about a little bit about other dashboards that I can't show you. Did we even say what a dashboard is?
We didn't.
Okay.
How many of you here are Apttus users already? Okay. Salesforce users? Okay.
Okay, so for those who didn't raise your hands, a dashboard is reports grouped together. And there could be a variety of reasons why you group together reports. Mostly it's because you cannot put all the things in one report because of Salesforce limitations, and the other is because you don't want them to be in the same report, you want them shown next to each other. And so one of the uses I found for dashboards, besides this, is that we are also using Apttus Advanced Approvals. It's really great, really flexible. Whatever we throw at it, it can do. The one challenge is if you also use Salesforce standard approvals, it doesn't show up there. And a lot of our managers use both because we use other Salesforce applications. So they have to go to one place for the Salesforce approvals and someplace else for Apttus Advanced Approvals. And not to mince words, they hate it. But you can build a report on Apttus Advanced Approvals, specifically showing what's waiting for a person. You can put that report into a dashboard, and you can put that dashboard on the Salesforce homepage right below the Salesforce standard approvals. And then again, everything is in one place, and work peace has been achieved. Another particular use that I will soon find probably, we are shutting down our second biggest office and moving it into a different country. So I see a dashboard in my future that tracks how many open contracts are left on that entity that we are shutting down and how many pending payments are left on that entity that we are shutting down, split by value, requesting unit, agreement type, expiration date, what have you. So moving on to some key benefits of Apttus Contract Management. I think this is you because I said everything I can say about.
We, from a dashboarding perspective, really appreciate everything that we have on our Salesforce platform. And so while Janos is talking about moving entities, we don't have to just move contracts. We have to move grants. We have to see who's traveling. And so for our Salesforce organization, we actually have 7 applications running on it. And so there are probably 5 that are major forward-facing to the end user, and then another 3 in back to support that, and then to help us with our integration with our finance system. And so from our perspective, we saw a huge decrease in demand on our time. I think Janos is ready to get rid of us because he doesn't need us to pull reports and dashboards together anymore.
Don't even say that.
So, I mean, from our perspective, when we learn how to use a report or a dashboard in one system, we've been able to move it across to everything else. And so we now even have somebody who comes around and does refresher trainings, and we just share him across all of our systems. Like, we're headed to London, who wants to do some refresher training? And so for us, we've really seen, whether we're looking at, when I started our first implementation on Salesforce, somebody told me I was going to get the 360-degree view of a grantee, and I didn't like those words at all. I could see that they got a grant. And so right now I can actually see a particular constituent is an OSF contractor, a grantee, a reviewer, a traveler. They attend events. And the dashboards and reports let us see kind of what that trend looks like and how many people kind of cross and get multiple services, either from OSF or from multiple entities. For example, we've had issues where people realize that we don't know, kind of prior to bringing our contract system together, that they were contractors in both the US and the EU in some way. So we've really seen an increase there. Lessons learned, that's me.
Yeah, I think so. I'm done.
Lessons learned. So again, we really learned a lot when we did our other implementations. And so my first one is like, what metrics do you want to get out? Once the system is in place, what do you want to see? Because we're in a really good place for our contract system, and we're now in a good place for our grant system, but we had to go back a step and do a significant build on our grant system because we couldn't get cycle time reports. We didn't set up the data in which we wanted to get the data out. And so we had to go back and meet with business users and then re-explain, what does the process look like? How do we actually break this into different cycles? And so that is something that I think is huge in terms of analytics. You really need to know in the end what you want, otherwise you could wind up kind of doing that same kind of build. My other thing would be, as you're trying to build that out and build a dashboard, if your organization or company is anything like ours, data is not the first thing your end users are focused on all the time. And so teach a few key metrics. Teach what the dashboard looks like, show them what it is, get them engaged in something small and something relevant so that they can then kind of step back and apply it to the 6 different charts that you might see at a later date. I mentioned that we're using one of our consultants to go around and remind you, here are the dashboards, here's how to use them, here's how to create a report, tell me where you're stuck, and keep refreshing. I think it's one of those things where if we don't continue to tell people it's out there and they can use it, it goes stale and they forget. And so the next time they go to try to pull something, they're like, oh, I don't know how to do this. And so to me, that's a little bit about planning ahead and then making sure you're keeping a steady state of engagement going forward. That's it.
Thank you so much for your time.